Hello, my name is Connor.
And I'm Jason.
And you oh my, what the heck was that?
Now you're going to keep it. Take it.
No. Nobody will ever know. Hello. Dadgummit. All my Christian cursing out of the way. Hello, my name is Connor.
And I'm Jason.
And you are listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast.
So, we have talked about, if you've been part of this journey, we are attempting to have a steady look over Jesus' shoulder in a chronological order. I have one job, well, two jobs, to talk when Connor says, hello, my name is Connor, and I have a job of keeping the schedule, and I'm terrible at one of those jobs. So, we're kind of all over the place. I think last episode, we talked about John the Baptist, and specifically the murder of John the Baptist. And that's typically followed with the feeding of the 5,000. And we've already done the feeding of 5,000. So we're jumping back ahead to Matthew 14, starting at verse 22. And this account takes place entirely or mostly on the sea. And so and this lake that they are, that's kind of the centerpiece of all their travels. And so, in preparing our minds and hearts for this, any context that you might think is useful to frame this?
Yeah, so we have talked about before, correct, Jesus calming the storm, right?
I think so.
Yeah, let's say we have. At some point, Jason and I have, so it's not a factual inaccuracy.
There you go.
Whether it was recorded and uploaded on a podcast is a whole other question. But I want to touch one piece here, maybe, and give a little light, give a little context and a light and a little dignity to how the disciples viewed the world and how they perceived the world. So Jesus, these guys are on the lake and they see what they do not know up to this point is Jesus walking to them on the waters. And 26 is when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. And there's a sense in which I think it'd be really easy to either skip over this or to dismiss it as superstitions of a bygone era of them not fully understanding and them fully not getting the world. What's interesting to me is Jesus, when he gets there, doesn't rebuke them or doesn't correct them when they are afraid that it is a ghost, when they're afraid that Jesus, like that their perception of the world is that there are ghosts out there and they should be frightened of them. And so what I want to just draw out, and I think there's lots of other things that can help give dignity to these people, that there are good reasons for the way they react to Jesus. There are cultural reasons, there are religious reasons, and they view the world a little bit differently than I do, where my assumption in a given scenario is not to assume ghosts or spiritual beings at work, however you want to phrase that. And for them, that is a given possibility. Whereas for me, I'm going to have to take down a lot of other options to get there. And so for me, this is just work I'm continually trying to do when I encounter the disciples, where I want, my initial reaction is either to skip or to scorn, and I don't want to skip or scorn them.
Well said. Yeah, I think it. Well, you can imagine if somebody, say your spouse is like, "Oh, I just saw a ghost," you're like, "I'll give you a minute." what really happened? And then there's a fixation on one hand to the paranormal, but even on all the shows and stuff, like where's the evidence, And I think you do that with a lot of God stuff, not just ghosts. But I think your observation of Jesus not correcting them, because I think, and this is true about multiple things with Jesus, but if I'm Jesus, I would just clear that up for him. That you could do it in a millisecond. It's like, well, not a millisecond, but a few milliseconds. Is by the way, no ghosts.
Yeah, well, I got your attention,
Yeah, let's just go ahead and get this out of the way, because you're going to be, and this is the thing too, he knows where they're headed. Mm-hmm. He knows Pentecost is coming. He knows his ascension's coming, all of this, his death, burial, and resurrection. And I would think you'd want your people to know that, because it's going to come up.
And I think it's helpful to remind ourselves that whether their complete view of the spiritual world is accurate or not, Jesus doesn't seem to see that as utterly, completely essential to their ultimately them proclaiming the gospel and starting his church, which can say a lot to us, where it's like, and maybe they completely get it right. Maybe Jesus is like, yeah, Connor, you need to reorient your mind to be more like the disciples, or maybe they get it half right, or maybe they get it, whatever, or they get it not right at all. But no matter what the answer is, I think it can speak to us.
Yeah, that is really important. I've heard it said, okay, so you accept Jesus can forgive you over bad behavior. Will you accept that he's going to have to forgive you for bad doctrine, for bad understanding, for misunderstanding God? Because you cannot say God's ways are higher than my ways. And, it's the heaven is the earth. And then the next thing saying, and I got him figured out, And I've heard that all my life. I've heard, you can make mistakes, but you better not have bad doctrine, which doctrine is just teaching. It's how you think God wants you to live.
Sure.
And I think the ghost thing is important. I've also, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, and even in kind of like more modern, the way I think it would come across kind of in today's day and age in 2025 is that sense in focusing more on the danger of getting doctrine wrong, which I think that is completely valid in a lot of ways. But if, say, they're wrong in this situation, and we know in other situations they are wrong, and Jesus is not nearly as militant about correction as we usually are, it can even speak to, like, I just want to make sure, because it's easy in my mind, because I don't deal with what your past, where it was like you specifically talking about doctrine there, but in my own life and in various situations, I have heard some variation of how dangerous wrong doctrine can be, and that's still completely true. But it's also doesn't negate the fact here, or negate the reality that we are going to have plenty of doctrines wrong.
That's right, and I think both things are true. Is that anything you can know, I think you should know, and I think you should always be seeking the best. So that's true. And I think there can be very dangerous ways of thinking about God, Simultaneously, we just have to own, even if I had 1,000,000 years, I'm not closing the gap substantially between what God knows and what I know.
And so for me, and this is the whole point of why we, I think, in Amazed and Perplexed focus on Jesus, is like, in all of that, the goal is, okay, if my goal is to think rightly and to know God as well as I can, like I got to keep Jesus in the center of the picture.
That's right.
And I just got to keep putting it back and forth, and I got to keep, whether it's the amazement or the perplexion or anything in between, I've got to keep putting, for maybe this is a bad phrase, I got to keep putting my bullseye back on Jesus, because everything Satan wants to do is to pull me away from that. Is
That's
to
right.
get, and if he wants to get me mired in right or wrong doctrine, and that gets my focus off Jesus, and that's more than okay with him.
That's exactly right. So I'll start reading in Matthew 14:22. Immediately, so this is after he feeds the 5,000. So it says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they cried, and cried out in fear. And Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me!" Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You have little faith," he said. "Why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." So, Connor, what about that amazes you?
There's quite a few things, and they all kind of are connecting together in my mind right now. I think back to moments in the Old Testament that would have been on the forefront of the disciples' minds when the power of God was on full display, and often it's associated with incredible yet terrifying things. There's reason when the angels always show up, there's, do not be afraid. It's because this is my sense, God's holiness, his otherness, his goodness is so stark against the world, against ourselves, that it is worthy of being afraid of. And so you get this moment where God's power is so fully on display in Jesus here, and I am just moved. I'm almost to the point of not being able to really to get my thoughts out. I am moved that God's response in that is take courage and to not be afraid. In this previous conversation we had just a moment ago about keeping Jesus in the center of things, and it's so easy to get lost in doctrinal questions and ethical questions and philosophical questions, and to feel concerned about what's going on in my life with the world, with my family, with health situations, with any number of things. And in reality, for me as a broken sinner, God, by all rights, it should be terrifying to see him move. But in the person of Jesus, we see this beauty that he is calling us towards him. And he is telling us, even in the midst, while he does miraculous, incredible, amazing things, that he's calling us into a new way of viewing things, where his goodness, his holiness, he's not just saying, don't be afraid, but he's actually saying, come and take part in it. I'm so moved that he would not only call the disciples into Peter and say, hey, don't be afraid, I'm powerful over this, but hey, come and do what I'm doing. Come and be a part of my power, of what I've got going on. And there's so many things, but that right now is just hitting me.
I love that. I think it's funny because when we talk about events, and of course we talk about walking on the water is the same kind of thing, but there's almost this sense that they're like, all right, what's the next page? Oh, the walking on the water scene is about to happen, or the parting of the Red Sea, or whatever it is, This is just any given Tuesday. I think it's also amazing that there have not been significant miracles that I'm aware of. For 400-something years, God doesn't communicate, between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I'm not saying he wasn't doing anything. We just don't have records that I think are credible. But then again, if you could challenge me, and I'd be like, I learned something new. But they just experienced the feeding of the 5,000. And they're still processing it. And now this. And they're about to experience like two of them. I mean, we're still talking about it. I mean, it's just amazing. And how God, you'll live years and years. And they had lived years and years and then received the history from their parents about nothing miraculous happened. And then bang, bang, these two things. And how it's just so generous and so beautiful and yet not unusual. But that idea of him saying to them, and that so not only were they not ready for it, but it's really you think, I guess the application to me is, I think nothing big is going to happen in my life because no one has tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, something amazing is going to happen to your life, and then all of a sudden you're in this moment. And I don't know. I just think that's pretty incredible.
It is incredible. It draws to me, and I wonder if some previous version of Connor studying the Bible just happened to hone in on these two stories like back to back, because I think the way that I view trying to be a follower of Jesus in the world, kind of in a lot of ways, like what I aim for mirrors these two stories, and like trying to live like Jesus, or even living like the disciples to some degree. You have Jesus feeding the 5,000. You have him providing abundantly, him with the disciples partnering to feed a whole bunch of hungry people. I remember talking about this and the anxiety that would have been in that crowd, and having bellies full for the first time for so many people, and the blessing that truly is. And then Jesus walking out into a storm and calming it. And how I perceive Jesus as he walks through the world is very much this, is him walking through the world in a storm, like Jesus walking around and the storm constantly trying to swirl around him, like people trying to trying to distract Jesus and trying to get him to fall beneath the waves. And all he does is just walk through the storm and just keeps calling us after him. And like, for me, I'm now realizing I think these two stories here, like there's a sense in which maybe I need to be trying to live more into the miraculous nature, or more into the I'm going to say this, and this might be is contradictory and dumb, but maybe I do need to, like we talked about, live more into the to the superficial miraculousness, because I don't want to discount the other elements of the miraculous nature of all that's going on here. But I'm constantly trying to. I think my thought when I come to Jesus is often parallels these two stories of being somebody that is so confident in the Father, so confident in God's plan, that as the storms around me rage, that I'm able to confidently walk through them, walk over them, and not be distracted by them, and also be somebody that is abundantly trying to help and provide with what God has given me. And I'm just now realizing, I was like, oh yeah. And then I'm like, you talked about this just happens in the span of time, and you think about when they were thinking about this story, however many years later, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that happened so quickly. And I'm not advocating that my view is the only biblical view for how you should view it, but I'm just now realizing that in my head, these two stories are such building blocks for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll tell you what amazes me about this is that, and it is part of the text, but it's how I've been taught this text. And it has to do with so much how I've been taught a lot of things. But I think so many people's focus is on Peter sinking and the phrase, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" That this is mostly a corrective. And it's like, what's your mind looking for? If your mind thinks, yeah, if I was with God right now, he would point out all these things I need to improve in. And I've had this experience a bunch. At our church, we will frequently in smaller groups say, okay, imagine Jesus talking to you. What would he say to you right now? Mm-hmm. And some are like, I love you and I'm proud of you and we're going to get through this. But some are always, I don't care if you ask them 100 times, they're like, yeah, he's going to point out how I didn't love my neighbor well enough and how I didn't, it's like every interaction with God is somehow going to be disappointed and corrective. Mm-hmm. It's like, you're not even close, And I think they draw them from this passage. And I think what amazes me is that when Jesus sees people go against the type. So I'm thinking of the two Gentiles, the centurion and the Syrophoenician woman, who's like, I choose faith, even though I wasn't raised in monotheism, we would assume. And I'm just choosing to believe based on this little tiny tidbit of evidence I see, or at least what I've heard about. Jesus, it literally says Jesus was amazed by their faith. I think Jesus was amazed by Peter's faith when he said, come out, I think that is just a fascinating thing. And I think his answer, take courage as I, don't be afraid. That's what he's wanting for them, And I think this sentence is much like, you could say, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? And be really like cynical and disgusted, disappointed. I think this could easily be, oh, Peter, you didn't have faith. Why did you doubt? Like, this could have been a beautiful memory for you, and I hope you can take the beauty, but now you've always got to remember you sank. And then, and this is interesting, if I walked on water for 2 milliseconds, I would try the rest of my life to walk on water again. Seriously, if there's a body of water around, I keep trying, and there's no record of him trying again. And I do wonder, number one, I think Jesus walked on water because there's a need. I don't think he's like, hey, I need to add another miracle to the repertoire, so that I have, I can either change whatever he does. He change the surface of the water when he steps in it, or is he simply defying gravity? But it's because he needed time alone, and and this is a way to get to them. I don't think he's like, hey, check out my new power, But it is that dynamic of, oh, Peter, this could have been such an incredible memory for you, and it doesn't have to be this way, And I don't know. To me, that more fits Jesus' overall theme in general, but specifically to this situation.
I echo a lot of what you're saying, and I am amazed by it, and I do tend to read it with the same sort of voice that you read it, but I think the thing that, like, if I was Peter and I was thinking about what happened here a week later, a year later, 5 years down the road, it would be the same sort of battle that you talked about, right? It'd be as you think about one time I walked on water, and then I failed, and then my Savior said, you have little faith, why did you doubt? But then also before that, He's told me to take courage and to not be afraid.
Yes.
And I think the reminder for myself is like, there are plenty of times where I'm falling into the ocean. I take my eyes off of Jesus and I don't trust him and I fall in. And it's easy to fully focus on this last statement, and to think, okay, well then the next time God's not going to call out for me. Jesus is not going to call out for me. Jesus is not going to tell me to come, because I have so little faith, because I doubted. Peter wasn't materially different before Jesus told him to come out. Like he was, like he didn't change. He was not a completely different person.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is telling Peter and the other disciples to take heart and to have courage. And just because he quote unquote failed in this one time doesn't negate the call that Jesus has, or the reality that he keeps on knocking on the door saying, come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And this is the thing is my history of being raised in proof texting is we'll latch onto one thing and then color the whole story and miss the beauty of this. And man, the more we're sitting with this, I'm like, oh, this amazed me. I have to mention these two things. One is that Jesus is walking on the water, Peter's walking on the water, and that is that I've been in these situations where I'm like, God wants me to be here. He's going to give me what I need. I'm doing it. Then I get in the middle of it and the faces of the people.
Yeah.
I don't think they're hearing me. Matter of fact, in this podcast, I was making a point and I was looking at you and you were thinking about something. And I was like, oh, I'm way off. How do I fix this? And then I was literally questioning, did I even hear what Connor said? Have I changed the subject? Am I responding? That's Peter right there. Mm-hmm. When you have all that in you, the butterflies in your stomach, or your just all this doubt in your heart, that's Peter. And so take heart that God honors the first steps that got you there. Mm-hmm. I went into the room, but then the people looked at me and I wanted to cry or whatever. I've been in so many situations where I felt so inept. Mm-hmm. Like this week, there were conversations. I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, wait, calm yourself. You can do this. The other thing is, as Peter's falling, and I feel like I made this point here. I made it somewhere a bunch. So sorry if we have. But as Peter's falling, have you ever tried to stand in water? How long do you stand? How quick do you fall? Milliseconds. Mm-hmm. He would have been so many feet deep. And if Jesus isn't right beside him, Jesus will have to dive into the water. But there's no sense he has to dive in the water. Mm-hmm. So Peter is sinking slower. Like there's even something miraculous as he's struggling, and calls out Jesus to save him. And then Jesus finds the leverage.
Yeah.
And we'd have no record of Jesus being super powered, although I have no problem that he's super strong, But he finds leverage on water to lift it. And there's so much amazing layer. And the other thing, now I'm on 3, so I'm borrowing a point from the previous thing. But it is that idea of when they worship Jesus, I want you to imagine this. Like if Jesus was really upset with them, like why didn't the rest of you ask to walk out? You know what I mean? Why is it just Peter? And Peter, why'd you give up? This kind of thing. Their worship would have been disingenuous if he was angry with them. They would have more feared him. And I'm not suggesting they didn't have fear. But it's like, can you imagine if, it's so weird because we're both humans, but it's like, I'm like, man, Connor, I'll do whatever you say. And I do it. And then I totally display, I didn't really believe you, and I fail. And then we get all together. And then me and my friends, the other ones that didn't even want to volunteer, like, you are wonderful. I mean, how are they worshiping? Like, are they singing, or whatever? But it's like, how could Jesus honestly receive that if he was disgusted or truly disappointed in Peter? That wouldn't even make sense.
You said something about how often you get out into a situation and you get out of the boat into the storm and you feel like, man, my eyes are on Jesus. This is where God has me. And then suddenly you look around and you're like, oh no, this is not. If I was really doing something that God wanted, then the people's faces around me wouldn't look this way. Then the situation, they would feel different. Yes. Then I would see things differently. Things would be meeting a certain expectation. And here is what I keep trying to get across in my own life, into my big thick skull, is 100% of the time, I have repeatedly gotten out of the boat and walked towards Jesus and fell into the water. Not one time have I ever wished that I never got out of the boat. Now, plenty of times I've refused to get out of the boat and go to Jesus.
So true. So good.
But I have yet I have yet to regret getting out of the boat, even when I sink and fail, and Jesus has to save me. And so yeah, that's for me, as specifically thinking about your situation of being a follower of Jesus, going into putting yourself into situations where you feel like you're really putting yourself out there into the storm. It can, like, I am sure Peter, like, it was a crazy moment, but like suddenly getting wet, being in the middle of the storm, being afraid, being terrified. Peter was not physically comfortable with what happens here. Now, he was safe. Jesus was safe. He kept him safe, but yet he still was physically uncomfortable. And that's what I want to keep trying to get into my thick skull is keep getting out of the boat.
Honestly, that point is so strong. I'm like, should we continue? I mean, we haven't got to perplexing, but it is so good. And then this is your real life. Every day you have the choice to, will I get out of the boat? I was walking into Walmart yesterday. There's a veteran there. He's walking with a cane. A question popped in my head simply about his cane, and I ended up having 10 minutes of conversation, and I did not have the time. Yeah. But I had 10 minutes of conversation with him, and I just wanted him to know somebody noticed him, that he was loved.
Sure.
So I'm standing there, and I'm like, we should probably go into Walmart now because we're there at the cart place. And I'm like, no, this is good. But every time I see somebody walk by, I'd be like, do I need to hurry up? Do I need to rush?
Yeah,
that's Peter on the waves. I mean, this is don't make this huge. I'm not suggesting this is not a big deal, but I'm saying you experience this every day if you really want to follow Jesus.
Well, and a good example of that, like of that feeling, like, oh, I should talk to that person, or there's that guy homeless. Does he need help? Should I stop here? Like, yeah, maybe down the road, the ask of the homeless person is a little too much. You don't have the time to do it, but like, if you have the time to get out of the boat for 5 minutes. God, like at least for me, I need to stop worrying about what God's going to need of me 10 minutes from now and be more concerned with what he needs of me right
Powerful. Now. That's exactly right. So what perplexes you? What do we got? Like 30 seconds?
No, we're good. It can be a little bit of a longer one. Yeah. So I am mystified, not mystified. Maybe that's the wrong word. I am perplexed. You brought out the part where suddenly they're all like, oh my goodness, truly you are the Son of God. And I'm just so, maybe I'm perplexed because I know what happens after this. And you've drawn out for me a lot of times, like I think there is some friendship in this group, but I do think there is a separation. There's some rabbi to student separation, but I'm astounded by this. Like, how does Jesus not just become so other to them? How does this happen? And it just not become this like total, I don't know. How does he not become the other? How does he not become this sacred cow or somebody that they are shunting off to the side because he's just too much? And there's a sense in which, like, I sometimes will have God act in my life, and I will have a specific kind of reverence for him that will dissipate. And so I assume there's a similar thing that happens here. Like, to be human is to cast doubt upon events after they happen, even if you have video evidence of them happening. But I'm mystified. I'm mystified at how this happens. It's such a stark moment. And what I love is it says, then those who were in the boat. So basically all the disciples have come to the unanimous decision that that truly you are the Son of God. Like, what are the group dynamics at play happening there? How does that not, like, when one of them later on is being a twerp, how do they not go, dude, we were there in the boat. We remember, like, you were the first one to whisper he's the Son of God. And the extrapolation of, if he can walk on water, if he can make Peter walk on water, Jesus made fun of his faith. We kind of got off to the side of it, a little bit. We didn't get the brunt of it, but he made fun of his faith. But yeah, he made Peter walk on water. Yeah. I'm constantly mystified by this. And like, I get it, but then I don't.
Yeah. The way I'm hearing what you're saying is, like, how do you go back to normal human behavior when you know the guy with you just walked on water, just mass-produced food? This is so unthinkable, because I've heard this since I was a kid. I was like, of course he fed 5,000, but it's like there was no predicting it in a million. Like, if you had a betting pool, if you had FanDuel or whatever trying to predict this, it's like, it wouldn't even be on the board. Will he feed all the people? It just wouldn't be. Will there be a riot? I'd bet on that. Would he just try to sneak away before the people like got mad? There's just no way to think this happened. There's no scorecard that you'd be like, I'm betting this happens. And so then how do you, like the next day, it's like, hey, I need to go to the bathroom, fellas. It's like, oh, Son of God goes to the
Still?
bathroom.
Yeah.
You know, it's just such a, I mean, we take it in so easy, and how every day was a choice of trust.
You know, I do even wonder if there's some disappointment, because I remember moments in my life where I've had like mountaintop moments with God where it's like, man, I felt his presence so intensely, and like he was there right beside me, and then the next day, I wake up and it's like, I was really good. It was a great memory, but I still got to brush my teeth. I still got to
exactly.
I still got to eat. I still got to eat oatmeal. And you're kind of like, we have this tendency to, at least for me, I tend to invalidate something because it's not happening all the time.
Right.
And yeah, I'm. It's helpful for me, like we've talked about before, that if I was a disciple, there's always, we talk about this all the time, that like, oh, if I was a disciple, it'd be so easy to not doubt. But like recognizing, okay, I would be just as bad, if not worse, than a lot of the disciples in how I doubt and how I view Jesus. But I think getting to that mind, maybe it's a helpful mindset to think about some of the times in my life where I've had those mountaintop experiences, and the next day there's still life to be lived. And what's funny is that Jesus is still there right next to them, and like that's got to be it had to even be weirder to think about, like moments where like that I felt Jesus like with me. I felt like I was having a mountaintop experience. And then the next day I get up and I was like, okay, I know that Jesus is still with me. Like I know he's with me, but then to actually like be one of these and to look over and be like, oh yeah, Jesus is right there. Like you said, he just went to go to the bathroom.
Right.
That's wild.
It is. And it can't be overstated, that feeling of, once you have a certain quality of experience with God, like the mountaintop, then it makes the normal feel like less than. Like somehow, oh, now I've moved into the secular and I was once in the sacred or the spiritual. And it's like, no, it's still the same. And walking beside him would have felt the same. Mm-hmm. You know, their feet still would have been sore. Their fears still would have been with him, all those things.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Because like there's a sense in which it's like, man, if Peter walked on water, like, did he have his sandals on? Was he barefoot? Like, were those sandals would there tendency like look at these sandals and be like, well, shouldn't these be some sort of relic down the road? Shouldn't these be like, some sort of special thing? And yet, like, I don't know, there probably is some church in like Northern Africa that has the
worships the sandals,
the worship the sand, that has like a single rope from the sandal of Peter's feet. But hey, that's cool. If that exists, I would love to see it one day. But yeah, so what perplexes you?
So here's the thing, and I'm gonna, if you're listening to this and you are an 𝐴IM graduate, so the class of 2025, I was with the 𝐴IM students eventually admission students down in Lubbock, Texas last week, but this is a very on point perplexion for me. So Jesus is there and he's with the disciples. They've just fed the 5,000 and he sends them out on a boat. Was he thinking, in order to catch up, I'm either going to have to get another boat, I'm going to have to walk around the whole lake, or was already on his mind, I'm going to walk across the water? Mm-hmm. Don't know. And I don't think anybody can make the case he knew exactly what he was going to do. There's no record of him walking on the water, no practice of walking on the water, and he never walks on the water again. So that it's just fascinating to me, and that alone. But the perplexing piece is this. I find myself, I have some giftedness. Everybody does. If you don't think you have giftedness, you're listening to this, you need to know, you need to ask God about your giftedness, your community about your giftedness, and believe you have giftedness. Think about Jesus, who would have been like, well, I don't want to show that because I don't want to look like I'm showboating. But the Friday or the Wednesday night, we're gathering and we're having this time of singing. And this is something I did a ton when I used to work down in Adventures in Missions. I would get the students close, tight, in the dark, and we would just praise as loud as we could. Not that was more spiritual than anything else, but there's something about that resonance and the way the harmonies come together and the freedom people have when the lights are off, that it's just a different quality of me. And I've always loved harmony. I've always loved music. I've always loved powerful words shared with powerful music. It's just really, really good. And by the way, this is all a cappella. And so, which if you're a Church of Christ person, you're like, of course it is. And if you're anybody else, you're like, what? Anyway, but trust me, it's really awesome. My voice has had strain over the last years. I've had multiple problems with my vocal cords and I've done all kinds of, interventions to try to make it better. And a lot of times I feel like I've got a low-grade sore throat, and I need to work that out with health and with God. But anyway, that night I had almost my full voice. Mm-hmm. It felt incredible. And I vacillated over and over again. Because I could hear this other harmony that nobody was singing, and I'm like, I want to sing that. I want that to add to the sound. And man, when I would, it felt, man, this is thrilling and beautiful. But then I'd immediately have stop showboating. You're showing off. You're an arrogant person. And I've always hated being in the presence of the arrogant Christian. Mm-hmm. And now I'm like, am I becoming what I hate? Like, this is all in my mind, you know? And then somebody had said something to me. And I what I wanted to say is they'd asked for something, and I'm like, okay, this guy's offering me. Here's what I meant to say. This guy's offering me a blood oath to do this, but it came out. This guy is offered to shed his blood, and I'm like, we're singing songs to Jesus. I'm like, he's asked to sing another song, even to the point of shedding his blood. And then once I said that, I was like, that's inappropriate on almost every level. So now not only am I thinking showboat, now I'm a blasphemous showboater. And I'm like, oh, I just had to keep calming my spirit and be like, it's about Jesus, it's about Jesus, about Jesus. I don't know if I did that right. I don't know if it bothered people. I don't know if it's bad or good. I just know I was trying to show up fully me, fully believing in Jesus, and it still has that tainted feel of, was I doing that for ego? Mm-hmm. You know, and I think this a lot with Jesus. I'm like, now because it's Jesus, I'm like, of course it was right. But if you're the guy that has to play that role, not the Messiah role, but the person going and helping people and miracles are sometimes needed, why didn't you just wait until it was quiet? Why do it on the Sabbath in front of people? You know what I mean? Why not just walk around? Why not just go in the boat in the first place? You know? Mm-hmm. And that's the perplexing part. And I want to be super clear. I trust Jesus did the right thing. I don't know what exactly to do with it because I feel such fear and trepidation around, okay, I've got this gift. And I love to sing. I love to sing loud. And when my voice is good, it's very, very good. And when it's not, it's bad, you know. But I just take such delight in that. And I think other people are blessed too. Yeah. And yet every time it happens, I think, like I've sang solos in front of groups. And then when they applaud, I'm like, I just want to get out of here. You know, and how did Jesus function with having that much power and not being arrogant about it? And that whole thing.
I think there's kind of there's an interesting dichotomy here where I wrestle with this all the time, where especially people like that are disciples of Jesus, there are specific things that you've had spoken in your life that you've had reaffirmed by God as specific giftedness. And you've lived enough life as a follower of Jesus that there are like calls that you can become familiar with that are like not easier to step into, but like you have more comfortability stepping into. And you end up in this kind of like, not thought pattern, but you end up in a similar groove where you have to kind of keep checking this thing against maybe your baser motives. What I think is at play, because I echo so much of what you had to say, is there's a sense in me which there's a version when that happens to you, when you're in that situation and you're like, is this of me? Is this of God? The question, like that question, I think is obviously very important. But I also wonder, for me, I've been wondering a lot recently, like, is that, like, I think it's a good question, but is it the right question? Because like for me, I think there's a version of me that God is making me into, and that I will be made into, that is more like Jesus than I am currently now. And I think I'm more currently like Jesus than I was 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Sure.
And so I wonder, for me, like, do I think I often need to step into the realization that the question isn't, is this of me or is this of God, but is the question like, am I fully living up to who God wants me to be, which is, it's all the fruits of the Spirit. It's being more and more like Jesus. And again, like it's a matter of semantics in my mind sometimes of how we frame these questions. But I also think it's incredibly important, where it's not a you versus God battle. It's a God calling you to be more like Jesus. Not God calling me to be more like Jesus in a given situation like this. And so like the question, like for me, that I want to keep asking myself is not, well, is this of God or is this of me? The thing that is of God, if something is of God, then that is, I think, if God is calling me to do something, and I'm wrestling with it, whether that is my own personal feelings getting in the way or that's actually what God wants. If it is what God wants, if it is what God wants, if he's calling me out into it, it's a similar vein of Jesus calling the disciples out and bidding them to come to him. He is inviting you to be who he always wanted you to be, to live fully into being more like his son, and to take part in his plan. And so and this just gets into like that dynamic you talked about earlier, where people can look at this passage as like a really critical of like, oh, you have little doubt, or, oh, you have little faith. And it's like, yeah, that's true. And I think it's important to remind ourselves of some of the dangers and things that can happen. But I also want to live into the fuller, I want to live into of who Jesus is calling me to be, not necessarily who I was 5, 10, 15 years ago at the start of my journey. And recognizing, and I swear I'm rambling here, but I think I'm coming to a crisp end point here. Let's build. I'm just going to keep building it up until we get there. God is making me more like Jesus. The Holy Spirit is forming me. The Holy Spirit is imparting the fruits of the Spirit into me. And that version of myself is where I'm the fully realized version of that is where I am headed, and it's where I was always supposed to be. And I want to take full partnership in what God is doing. And if God is changing me and shifting me to be much more like Jesus, then for me, maybe the question isn't always the time, is this of God or is this of Jesus? But am I fully living into who God is making me to be? So how does any of that hit you? Is it semantics? Is it?
No, I think, and then, we could have a whole discussion on that, but that is it a good question? It may be a good question, but is it the right question? There's some real power there. I think that idea of there are parts of yourself that until you ask the right question, you don't dig into that part of yourself, and you could frame that in a number of ways. But I just think there's something really important about being a practiced questioner of God, of yourself, and you're always thinking, is that really getting to the root of it? All I know is your words brought me, it felt warm. And I rarely live in this world where I'm talking about my feelings. I learned early on your feelings were not valuable they weren't useful to even know, but as I have a greater appreciation of God wanting you to love you with your mind, but also with your heart, with your soul, and this comprehensive whole nature of who God made you to be and interact with him with, I know your words brought me comfort. And I think what I'm taking is, number one, I don't have to be afraid of looking back on any situation and realizing, I could have taken 3 more steps in the water there and just not given in to the fear at all. I think that's how we learn, is we go back and we kind of diagnose, that's what happened. That's my propensity is to do that over and over again. And I think second, to calm that fear is to keep asking. And I think it's really super important. Two things. Number one, when they got back in the boat, the wind was calmed. So he did a double miracle there, walked on the water and calmed it, meaning he's comprehensively in control of the whole situation. But what does Jesus want? What if Peter hadn't said, save me? Would he have Jesus allowed his free will for him to go totally under and have to swim? He's a fisherman. It's not like he can't swim, Yeah. And so even when his eyes got off Jesus, when things really started to crash on him, he immediately went back to Jesus. And that's the answer for me. It's like the waves that were hitting me, or the storm, whatever he saw that really distracted him, were waves of echoes of fear of people saying in my past, oh, showing your gifts is arrogant, or, you don't want to be that guy. And I'm like, the answer is to say, Jesus saved me in that moment. Oh, I just literally said, be like Jesus in this weird, like, am I asked this guy to recreate shedding his blood? I was just so absurd. But even then, I'm like, wait, what do I need? Oh, Jesus saved me from these very thoughts that I'm having.
Oh, that's good.
And so there's something really comforting there for me.
Jesus saved me from these very thoughts. That's good. The same God, Jesus, who bids us to take a step out of the boat and walk towards him, even when we sink below and fall and take our eyes off him, is the same God that portrays himself as a father who runs off from a distance to sweep up his prodigal son into his arms. In the same way that Jesus snatches Peter's hand beneath the waves and he runs out to greet the prodigal son. Every time we get off the boat, Jesus is going to be there. And it's simple. And yet I think it's a truth that I need to keep preaching to myself, that when I have those thoughts of, should I get out of the boat right now? Should I take a step out into the waters? Not one time I've ever regretted it, and not one time has God not been there to rescue me. Grace, peace, and love.